2009, something happened which I think is a defining moment in Australia's economic history, but has happened without a great deal of comment, and that is China became Australia's single largest export market. It overtook Japan. But here is a thought I'd like to plant in your minds. It's hard to conceive, in fact I don't think there is, the possibility of any other country on earth ever again replacing China as Australia's largest export market. If you say, well, what about India? Well, sure, India is going to grow and it's impressive, but to the extent India grows, it will take its iron ore and other commodities off world markets, and Australia will have to sell even more of those products. There could be circumstances in which China so successfully, but I think improbably, diversifies its sources of resources and energy that Australia's share of China's trade falls. But I think that's improbable, and I think the events in the Middle East have just reminded the Chinese that whilst it might be a bit more expensive to buy some of Australia's resources and energy, and while there might be a few more legal hoops to jump through, that political risk is real, and political risk is not something you need to think about when you're investing in Australia or doing business with Australia. The other point, though, I'd like to leave you with is not only that we have this very high dependence now on China, not only for physical goods, for merchandise exports. We have 163,000 Chinese students enrolled in secondary and post-secondary institutions in Australia. That compares with the best number I have, 100,000 in the United States. So we have about 1/15 of the US population, and we have 63% more Chinese enrolled in our institutions. So that is why there's a certain feel like Hong Kong around Sydney and Melbourne. Hong Kong pre-1997, I hasten to add. And it's a good thing, and we're richer and happier for it. Make no mistake about it. And also investment. China's been the largest source of foreign investment by flow for the last 2 years. Chinese stock of foreign investment is still low, because of historical factors, but it's rising very quickly, and it's rising exponentially. So we have an extremely important economic future with China, and the complementarities between our economies and the fact that we've got very few people and they've got a lot of people means that those complementarities will just drive deeper and deeper integration. Whether we like it or not, this is a very, very sort of fundamental change in Australia's outlook and future. But we've done some sums, and I don't pretend they're rocket science, but I think they're not bad. We now are more dependent on the Chinese economy as a market than if you take Taiwan out of the picture, because Taiwan's not a sovereign country. We are now more dependent on the Chinese market than any other country in the world. I thought we could have been a bit behind South Korea, but as I said, China takes 25% of our exports. South Korea sends 23.9% of its exports to China. Japan, 19.6%. And then you drop down, the United States, 6%. And what's fascinating about that is that 6% is where we were in 2000. At the beginning of this millennium, China only took 6% of our exports. And then below that, if you look at the Europeans, it's no wonder when you're in Europe, even though the flying time from Beijing to Paris or London is about the same as Beijing to Sydney, but when you're in Europe, it feels like China's on the other side of the earth, on the universe, basically. It's 3% for them. So, at least in this respect, when we talk about dealing with China as a like-minded country, the good news or the bad news, whichever way you want to look at it, I'm not making a normative statement, is that we are more dependent on China than any other country. And so in terms of our relationship with China, we're very much on our own. And I do just need to say something very quickly then about the big issue, US, China, and where does Australia fit in the middle of that. And what I'd like to say, it's my own personal view very much on it, is that I'm quite sanguine about the US-China relationship. We haven't begun in Australia, despite our huge dependency on China vis-a-vis the United States, we haven't begun to put in place the sort of bilateral structure and architecture and relationships that the United States and China have between them. In Beijing, I never meet a senior official, if I can, because I'm usually crowded out because they're meeting Americans, but I never meet a senior official who's not getting off a plane to Washington or about to get on a plane to Washington, and that's true for all the think tank people. Now, I know there are real potential, and the strategic commentators like to focus on the potential for conflict. Of course, when you have an emerging power and an existing power has to accommodate in some way the emergence of a new entrant into the field, there will be pressures and stresses and strains. But so far, I think the management of the relationship has been excellent. If you look at how the very challenging times when Chen Shui-bian was the leader of Taiwan, how Beijing and Washington managed that relationship, that situation, the six-party talks, any number of issues, where Washington and Beijing have successfully managed those tensions and pressures far, far exceeds the moments when there have been slight flare-ups in the relationship. So I'm unashamedly sanguine about that relationship. It doesn't mean you can take it for granted, but there is so much structure and substance in the US-China relationship. As I said, we haven't begun to approach that level of ballast, if you like, in the relationship. And so for us, the most important thing is that China and the US can manage their relationship, and then that means that some of the more fraught scenarios that think tankers here in this country come up with will not eventuate. I might stop at that point. So thank you all very much for your attention. I've enjoyed this very much.